Hey guys, this is Isanai, and today I just wanted to share with you some of my thoughts and opinions on the new talent system that Blizzard is introducing for the Mists of Pandaria expansion. Up till this point, I think we just had these talents that we see over here available, but now they have a full calculator out that tells you what each specialization affords and whether or not we're keeping any of the old stuff that we had in the current trees in the next expansion. So looking at Feral, the first thing I want to go over is sort of the class, just everything we get regardless of specialization, and talk about some things that are missing, some things that are different, and some of the new stuff we get just within the specialization. The first thing that I saw just kind of browsing through these is that Life Bloom is not in here and Regrowth is not in here. Also, Remove Corruption is not in here. So those are the first things that kind of jumped out at me. And where those have gone is they've now been restricted to the Resto tree. Remove Corruption is in balance, which is a little weird to me, but they're no longer available to all specializations. So that's kind of unfortunate because Life Bloom's pretty much my primary HOT when I'm in PvP situations. It's just so powerful, especially stacked up to three stacks, and then when it blooms, it's really good too. So that's unfortunate that we lose that. In some of the other talents you'll see, we get a lot of either passive heals or really big heals more infrequently, so at the cost of the smaller heals we had with like Life Bloom, just kind of endlessly we could Life Bloom. So there's a trade-off there. I don't think it's terrible, but it's going to definitely change how we play. The other thing I saw that's not here is Survival Instincts and Frenzied Regen are both gone. Those have been moved into the Guardian tree, which is the bear tree now. So that is going to remove some of the utility we had playing Feral Cat, because we could switch into bear form for our defensive abilities. So we have lost a lot of those. They've really tried to make the specializations more distinct. We haven't lost all utility, but we have lost some. So that's just one thing I noticed kind of browsing through here. The first thing I want to point out is that you guys have probably noticed that a lot of these abilities now put you directly into cat form, like Prowl for instance. Instead of wasting a global cooldown to shift and then Prowl, you now press Prowl and you're automatically put into cat form. So that's pretty sweet. I think that's good that they're doing that. I wouldn't say it was needed necessarily, but it's definitely a good change. So a lot of things are the same, or at the very least they've been improved by incorporating the talents and glyphs that we have currently to improve their utility. So like for instance, Ferocious Bite is the same as it was before, except it incorporates the glyph of Ferocious Bite, which restores some health depending on how much energy you use. And then also you will have a chance to refresh the duration of your rip when you bite targets at below 25% health. And then your critical strike chances increase 25% against bleeding targets. So those are all incorporated into the Ferocious Bite ability. Bash is as it is now talented. Let's see, most of these are kind of the same. A change in Swipe is that instead of having a particular damage percentage, depending on your form, the damage will vary. But then also the tooltip says that you get 20% additional damage against bleeding targets. And you see that in several other abilities where maybe some of the other buff damage percentages they had are gone, but you get 20% increased damage against bleeding targets. So that's good. I think Feral should be rewarded for having bleeds upon their targets all the time, because that's a really important part of the class. Dash is the same dash we have now, plus the talented rip breaking ability. And one thing I want to look at here is Fairy Fire. When I saw just the talent tree initially, I thought this was going to be the only way we would get the Fairy Fire effect at all. But you have a choice between Fairy Swarm and then Fairy Fire. If you choose Fairy Swarm, it will replace Fairy Fire. Now Fairy Swarm does have some advantages. It applies a snare to your target, which reduces movement speed by 50%. And then you can use it in any form. If you choose to use it in cat form or bear form, though, it incurs a 6-second cooldown. The Fairy Fire that we have here is basic Fairy Fire, no cooldown, instant cast. It now applies the full 12% armor debuff that we had to talent into before. But then it also says in this tooltip that we can cast in bear form with no cooldown. At least that's what it appears. So if you choose Fairy Swarm, bear form will not incur a cooldown. On the other hand, if you stay with Fairy Fire, you can't cast it in cat form. Given the other two talents we have access to in this tier, I'm inclined to forego Fairy Swarm since we still have Fairy Fire and just take the cost of having to shift out or shift into bear to cast it. Because I think it's maybe not so much better than Fairy Fire that I'm willing to give up the other two talents, which I think would be really useful in PvP, which I'll talk about later. So that's something to keep in mind. Omen of Clarity, Track Humanoids, Pounce, these all appear to be the same. I think Pounce is the Pounce we have now that's talented. Hurricane, Nature's Grasp, Innervate I'm not sure is the same. Rebirth doesn't require a reagent now, which I think it should always be like that, but it doesn't appear that we're going to get the glyph which makes your targets return at 100% health. So I don't know if there are going to be glyphs in the next expansion or not, but it looks like we have the same sort of rebirth that DKs have, where you come back at 20% health. We get Flight Form 58, which is pretty sweet. I thought I heard somewhere that we won't be able to fly until level cap, so maybe druids get out of there through a loophole, I'm not sure. Probably not, but I kind of wonder what that means. It's 2 levels earlier, which is nice. Mark of the Wild has been changed a little bit. I'd say it's been nerfed. It still gives you plus 5% to strength, agility, stamina, and intellect, but you don't get any magical resistances increase, so that's kind of unfortunate. Hibernate's pretty much the same. Soothe, pretty much the same. Swift Flight Form at 70. I mentioned earlier we don't get Frenzied Regen or Survival Instincts in Feral. It looks like we do get sort of a kind of a shitty compromise, I'd say. We get Might of Ursoc at level 72, and that increases our maximum health by 30%, and then we'll pop our health back up to 30% if it was below that value for 20 seconds. So this seems kind of like, like Blizzard was like, we don't want to take away all your defensive abilities, but here's Might of Ursoc. I don't know if this is a bear only thing. It kind of makes sense that it would be, but that's not listed in the tooltip. It's on a 3-minute cooldown, so it's kind of not a good replacement for either Survival Instincts or Frenzied Regen, but there you go. Tranquility, I think that's the same. Cyclone is basically the same. I think Maim is also the same. Stampeding Roar has been changed a little bit. It still gives the AoE run speed increase to friendly targets and breaks your roots. But now, if you're not in cat or bear form when you cast it, it'll just default you to bear form, which seems kind of weird. I can't imagine why you would choose to default into bear form and not cat form for Stampeding Roar, but that's how it is now in the tooltip. At level 87, we get this new ability, which is pretty cool, or at least potentially is really cool. What it does is you basically trade one of your druid abilities, which depends on your spec, for an ability from another class in spec. And when you do that, it lasts for an hour, and this effect will persist through death, so you won't have to retrade or re-exchange your talent or your abilities again. I kind of wonder what abilities we'll be able to choose from and what abilities we'll have to give up to choose other abilities. Like, could we give up something we don't use, like Tranquility, for something like Evocation or Ice Block? I kind of wonder about that, and if those abilities that we receive can be used in any form, or if we have to be in caster form to use them. So I'm kind of curious about that. It sounds like a really interesting ability. It's definitely different than anything we've had before. So let's take a look at what we actually get as Feral spec. The first thing I noticed looking at this one was that Mangle no longer has that debuff, the 30% increase to bleed debuff. So that's a little worrisome because that's a huge part of our damage. So I imagine, like I said before, they've been putting in 20% plus 20% damage on bleeding targets to some other abilities, so I wonder if that's where they're going for compensation, or maybe the tooltip just hasn't been updated. Hopefully that's the case, but Mangle is different in that way now. Tiger's Fury is as it's talented, Feral Instinct like we had before. Shred, again, there's that 20% additional damage for bleeding targets. That was a talent that we had before. It's now incorporated into the ability, which is really good. One thing that seems quite different is Savage Roar. I believe right now Savage Roar works to increase melee damage by 80% over its duration. And in this tooltip it says it increased physical damage done by 30%. So that suggests to me that all of our abilities will be increased 30% while this is up. So that may be what's replacing Mangle is the Savage Roar. It's just something that we have to keep up, you know, basically every 45 seconds, which, I mean, really, that's not too much shorter than the duration of the Mangle debuff. We'll just have to waste a set of combo points to get it. So that's not too bad. I mean, I think that definitely makes Savage Roar a much better ability, because currently I rarely use it in PvP unless I'm trying to proc Predatory Strikes. So I think that's a really awesome change. Predatory Strikes, I was really glad to see this was here. I was concerned this was going to get nerfed because there's been so much complaining in the forums, but it's right here, preserved, as it should be. RIP is basically the same, except it incorporates the Glyph of Bloodletting, where your Shred and Mangle increase the duration of RIP up to 6 seconds, for 2 seconds every time you Shred or Mangle. Thrash now appears to have a cat form version of it. It says damage varies by shapeshift form, and it also applies a periodic bleed damage, so that's pretty cool. There's not too much in there about what kind of damage, what kind of bleed damage, or for how long it lasts, or how much damage is done as an AoE ability for Thrash, but you do have a cat form version of it, which is pretty sweet. Nurturing Instinct has been changed. It now increases your spell power by 100% of your agility instead of the healing gun. So that gives it a lot more utility. It will now increase the damage done by any spells you have, and so that just really makes it a whole lot better. It'll also be really good for healing as well. Primal Fury, I think, is basically the same, except now maybe you get 10 rage instead of 5, but it's got the same additional combo point for crits and things like that, so it's basically the same. Barkskin, this is one that I was really disappointed to see they weren't going to incorporate the Glyph, because the Glyph is really good. The Glyph reduces your the chance to be hit with a critical strike by 25%. But this is just basic Barkskin, so and like I said, I don't know if we're going to have Glyphs in the next expansion, but it's too bad that they didn't incorporate that. Leader of the Pack is the same, Berserk is the same, Ravage is the same, except it now incorporates the talent. Skull Bash is the same as it is talented, which is good. I was afraid this was going to have a longer cooldown, which would make it useless, but it's the same as it is talented. Infected Wounds, and then Mastery, I think, is the same, increase to bleed damage per point of mastery, so that's a spec. It looks pretty good. They've chosen to incorporate most of the really important talents that we have that improve our base abilities into those abilities for the specialization, so I think they did a pretty good job there. Like I said, there's some things missing, some things were not improved as much as they could have been, but overall I think it's pretty well rounded and pretty well done.